The rain began its slow descent just before sunset, misting the air with a cool dampness that clung to everything it touched. Daniel Foster stood at his kitchen window, cradling a chipped mug of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. His gaze was fixed, as it often was these days, on the house next door. It was an old Victorian, its pointed gables and ivy-covered walls offering a certain charm, but it wasn't the architecture that held Daniel's attention. It was her, Eleanor Lyrae, the enigmatic woman who seemed to exist just a step outside the rhythm of the world. The first time Daniel had seen her unloading groceries from a sleek black car that looked far too modern for the cobblestone driveway it sat on, he had been struck by her stillness. There was a grace to her movements, a deliberateness, as though she were savoring each second of her task. Her features were striking, but not in a way that invited easy description. Ageless, timeless, with eyes that carried storms and starlight in equal measure. She was polite but distant, her voice as soothing as a lullaby, yet as guarded as a fortress. Weeks had passed since their first meeting, but Daniel's curiosity had only deepened. Eleanor rarely ventured out beyond her garden, which she tended with an almost religious devotion. He had never seen a visitor at her door, yet packages arrived regularly, plain, unmarked boxes delivered by couriers who never lingered long. And then there were the nights. It always began the same way. A faint hum, barely audible, drifting across the fence. At first, Daniel had thought it was a generator or perhaps some kind of old heating system, but the hum grew louder as the nights wore on, joined by strange pulses of light that flared and faded behind her curtained windows. Tonight was one of those nights. The glow was faint at first, a bluish hue seeping from the edges of her window frames. Daniel leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the pane as he strained to see more. The rain blurred the view, but there was no mistaking it. Something unnatural was happening in that house. He told himself it was none of his business. Whatever Eleanor did behind closed doors was her affair. Yet his mind raced with possibilities, some mundane, others more sinister. Who was she really? A recluse hiding from a painful past? A brilliant scientist working on secretive experiments? Or something else entirely? Daniel set the mug down with a clatter, his heart pounding in his chest. The glow intensified, casting sharp shadows against the trees that bordered her yard. He hesitated only a moment before grabbing his jacket and stepping out into the rain. The air outside was crisp and heavy with the scent of wet earth. He moved cautiously, the soles of his boots squelching against the sodden ground as he crossed his yard. At the fence, he paused, his fingers gripping the damp wood as he peered into her garden. It was eerily quiet. Even the hums seemed to have faded into the background, replaced by the rhythmic patter of rain against the leaves. Yet the glow remained, emanating now from the garage, a detached structure at the far end of her property. Its doors were slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Eleanor?" Daniel called out, his voice barely louder than a whisper. He didn't expect an answer, and none came. He should have turned back. He knew that. But something, curiosity, concern, or perhaps just the thrill of the unknown, propelled him forward. The gate to her yard creaked as he pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. He stepped inside, his breath hitching as he moved closer to the source of the light. The garage door opened wider with a gentle push, revealing a scene that made Daniel's pulse quicken. Inside, the walls were lined with what looked like old scientific equipment, monitors, cables, and machines that hummed with faint energy. At the center of the room stood a device unlike anything he had ever seen, a tall, cylindrical apparatus bathed in an otherworldly glow. Its surface was sleek, almost organic, and it seemed to pulse with a rhythm that was both mechanical and alive. And then he saw her. Eleanor was standing near the device, her hands resting lightly on its surface. She was barefoot, her hair damp and clinging to her face as though she had been caught in the rain. Her eyes were closed, her expression serene yet intense, as though she were listening to something only she could hear. "Eleanor?" Daniel's voice cracked, breaking the spell of the moment. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto him with a mix of surprise and something darker. Fear, perhaps, or anger. "Daniel," she said, her voice low but steady. "You shouldn't be here." The glow began to fade, and with it, the hum of the device. Eleanor stepped forward, her movements swift yet deliberate, placing herself between him and the strange apparatus. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound calm. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and gently guided him toward the door. Her touch was firm but not unkind, and her expression softened, though the fear in her eyes remained. "Please," she said, her tone almost pleading. "Go home, Daniel. Forget what you saw here." But as he stepped back into the rain, his mind racing with questions, he knew forgetting was not an option. Eleanor Lyrae was more than just an enigmatic neighbor. She was a mystery, and Daniel was determined to uncover the truth. The glow haunted him long after the rain had stopped. Daniel sat in his dimly lit living room, the hum of Eleanor's device an echo in his mind. He had tried to distract himself, reading, pacing, even flipping through old photo albums he usually avoided, but nothing worked. His thoughts spiraled back to her, to the way she had stood before that strange apparatus like a conductor before an orchestra, her every movement resonating with purpose. And to her words, "Forget what you saw." How could he forget? The mundane world of lawnmowers and coffee shops seemed laughably small in the face of what he had glimpsed. That device, that glow, it wasn't something out of a tech catalog or even some government project. It felt beyond, otherworldly. By the time morning arrived, Daniel knew he wouldn't be able to let it go. The first encounter of the day came when Daniel stepped outside to retrieve his mail. Eleanor was already there, kneeling in her garden, her hands buried in the soil. She wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast her face in shadow, but he could feel her attention shift the moment he appeared. "Good morning," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Daniel hesitated. Should he confront her outright? Pretend last night hadn't happened? The weight of the decision hung between them, unspoken, but palpable. "Morning," he replied finally, shuffling through the stack of envelopes in his hand. Eleanor returned her focus to the garden, humming softly to herself, a tune that was oddly dissonant yet oddly soothing. He lingered for a moment longer, watching her, before retreating inside. That afternoon, Daniel found himself standing outside her house again. It wasn't planned, at least that's what he told himself, but his feet had carried him there, as if guided by some unseen force. The air was thick with the scent of lavender from her garden, mingling with the faint metallic tang of rain lingering from the night before. He raised a hand to knock but hesitated. What was he even going to say? Before he could decide, the door opened. Eleanor stood there, her expression unreadable. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying that same mix of surprise and guardedness he had heard the night before. "This is unexpected. I need to know," he blurted out, his words tumbling over each other. "What I saw last night. What's going on, Eleanor? What is that thing in your garage?" For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes searched his face, as though weighing the risks of telling him anything against the cost of keeping him in the dark. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." Her home was as enigmatic as she was. The interior was a curious blend of vintage charm and stark modernity, with antique furniture juxtaposed against sleek, minimalist decor. Books were everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on tables, even balanced precariously on the arms of chairs. Eleanor led him to the living room, where a fire crackled softly in the hearth despite the warm day. She motioned for him to sit, then disappeared into the kitchen. When she returned, she carried 2 cups of tea, placing one before him. "I don't usually explain myself," she began, her voice calm but tinged with an undercurrent of tension. "But I think it's clear you won't let this go." Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "The device you saw," she continued, choosing her words carefully, "is complicated. It's a part of something much larger, something I've been working on for a long time." "Working on?" Daniel leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "For what? Science? Technology? Something else?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Let's just say it's a tool I need to ensure my continued existence." Her evasiveness only fueled his curiosity. "Existence? Eleanor, what does that even mean? Are you sick? Is this some kind of medical device?" She shook her head, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. "It's not that simple. And even if I could explain everything, you wouldn't believe me." "Try me," he challenged, his voice firm. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment he thought she might actually tell him. But then she stood abruptly, pacing the room with an energy that seemed almost restless. "Daniel, there are things in this world, things beyond what most people can comprehend. What you saw last night is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And trust me, you don't want to get involved." "But I am involved," he insisted, standing as well. "I saw it, Eleanor, and I saw you. Whatever's happening, you're not just some neighbor with a green thumb and a talent for trivia. There's more to you, and I need to know what it is." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time she looked genuinely weary. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Daniel. Sometimes it's better to leave things alone." He opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden noise cut him off, a sharp, metallic clang from outside. Eleanor froze, her eyes darting toward the window. In an instant, the guardedness was gone, replaced by something much colder: fear. "Stay here," she said, her voice a whisper, before disappearing down the hallway. Daniel's heart raced. Ignoring her command, he moved to the window and peered out. Two figures were moving through her yard, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the shadows. They carried something that glinted faintly in the sunlight, tools perhaps, or weapons. Before he could process what he was seeing, Eleanor returned, holding a sleek, cylindrical object that looked like a flashlight but hummed faintly in her hand. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Stay here," she repeated, her tone brooking no argument. And then she was gone, slipping out the back door like a shadow. Daniel hesitated only a moment before following, his pulse pounding in his ears. The tension in the air was suffocating as he stepped outside. The figures were closer now, their movements purposeful as they approached the garage. Eleanor emerged from the shadows, the object in her hand casting a faint glow. "Leave," she said, her voice low but firm. The figures stopped, their heads tilting in unison, like animals sensing a threat. One of them spoke, the words sharp and guttural, in a language Daniel didn't recognize. And then everything erupted. Eleanor moved with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible, the device in her hand emitting a blinding flash of light. The figures scattered, but not before one of them turned toward Daniel. For a moment their eyes locked, and Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't over. The morning after the confrontation, Daniel awoke to the faint scent of lavender, mingling with the acrid tang of scorched metal. It lingered on his clothes, a ghost of the night's events. His mind replayed the encounter in fractured pieces, the flash of light, the guttural voices, Eleanor moving like a force of nature. And then that look, the unearthly gleam in the eyes of the intruder who had locked gazes with him. He stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a tangle of unease and curiosity. Somewhere in the haze of sleepless hours, he decided, this wasn't just Eleanor's mystery anymore. Eleanor was waiting for him when he knocked on her door, as though she had known he would come. Her expression was unreadable, but the faint shadows beneath her eyes betrayed the toll of the night before. "Daniel," she said, her voice softer than he had expected. "I'm not leaving," he replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. "I don't have time for this," she began, but he cut her off. "You owe me answers, Eleanor. After last night, after them, you can't just push me away and expect me to go back to pretending everything's normal." She exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table as though searching for balance. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple," he pressed. For a long moment, she was silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, as if she were afraid the walls themselves might hear. "They weren't supposed to find me," she said. Daniel frowned. "Who are they?" Eleanor hesitated, then gestured for him to sit. She poured herself a glass of water, her movements deliberate, as though stalling for time. "They're not human," she said finally, her tone matter-of-fact. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Not human? What are you saying?" Eleanor met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes, fear but also resolve. "I am not human, Daniel, at least not in the way you understand it." The room seemed to shrink around him, the air thick and suffocating. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "Then what are you?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Lorraine, my people come from a place far beyond this world. I was sent here centuries ago as part of a mission to observe and understand humanity." Daniel stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deceit. But there was none. The weight of her words settled over him like a lead blanket. "Centuries?" he echoed. "Yes," she said simply. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "So, what? You've just been living here all this time, watching us? Why?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "The mission failed. I was cut off from my people, stranded here. At first I thought they would come back for me, but as the years turned into decades, I realized I was alone." Her words carried a quiet grief that made Daniel's chest ache. "And those people last night?" he asked. "The ones who broke into your yard?" "They're not people," she corrected. "They're remnants of an old enemy, a faction that once sought to destroy my kind. I don't know how they found me, but if they're here, it means they believe I still pose a threat." "Do you?" Daniel asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Eleanor's gaze hardened. "Only if they force my hand." The revelation left Daniel reeling. He had come seeking answers, but the truths he uncovered only raised more questions. How much of what he knew about the world, about reality itself, was a lie? Over the next few days, he found himself spending more time with Eleanor, drawn deeper into her strange and extraordinary existence. She showed him fragments of her past, ancient maps of star systems etched onto metallic sheets, journals written in a fluid, alien script, and holographic projections of worlds that made Earth seem small and fragile by comparison. But with each discovery came a growing sense of unease. The more Daniel learned about Eleanor's life, the more he realized how precarious her situation was. The enemy that had found her wasn't going to give up, and their motives remained a chilling mystery. The turning point came on a quiet evening when Eleanor invited Daniel to see the device in her garage up close. "It's called a lithium core," she explained, running her fingers along its sleek surface. "It's the only piece of my ship that survived the crash. It powers everything, my home, my defenses, even me." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, even you?" Eleanor hesitated, then placed a hand over her chest. "My body. It's not like yours. The core sustains me, keeps me functioning. Without it, I wouldn't survive." The implications of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "You mean if they take it?" "I die," she finished, her voice steady but grim. Before he could respond, the device emitted a sudden sharp pulse of light. Eleanor stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "They're here," she whispered. Daniel's blood ran cold. "Who?" Instead of answering, Eleanor grabbed the cylindrical device she had used the night of the attack and turned toward him. "Stay close to me." The tension in the air was electric as they stepped outside. The yard was bathed in the pale light of the moon, but shadows seemed to writhe at its edges. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. And then they appeared, figures emerging from the darkness, their movements fluid and unnatural. Eleanor raised her device, and the air crackled with energy. "You won't take it," she said, her voice firm. One of the figures stepped forward, its features obscured but its intentions clear. It spoke in that same guttural language Daniel had heard before, the words incomprehensible, yet dripping with malice. Eleanor didn't wait. She pressed a button on the device, and a beam of light shot toward the figure, sending it sprawling. The others hesitated, then surged forward as one. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched Eleanor fight with a precision and ferocity that defied anything he had ever seen. But even as she held her ground, he knew they were outnumbered. And then, amidst the chaos, he saw it. A small, sleek device one of the intruders was carrying. It pulsed faintly, its glow eerily similar to the lithium core. "Eleanor!" he shouted, pointing toward it. Her eyes followed his gesture, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. Without hesitation, she launched herself toward the device, her movements a blur. When it was over, the intruders had vanished, leaving only the faint hum of the lithium core behind. Eleanor knelt on the ground, the stolen device clutched in her hands. "It's a beacon," she said, her voice trembling. "They weren't just here for the core. They were calling for reinforcements." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes had just been raised, and the fragile balance of their lives was beginning to crack. The following days were a blur of quiet tension and unspoken questions. Daniel felt as though he were living in two worlds: the mundane suburbia of mailmen and grocery runs, and the shadowed, extraordinary reality of Eleanor's life. The beacon now sat disassembled on her kitchen table, its delicate components spread out like a fragmented puzzle. Eleanor spent hours hunched over it, her fingers moving with a precision that belied the gravity of her thoughts. "It wasn't meant for me," she said one evening, breaking the silence. Daniel looked up from his place on the couch. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on a small crystalline shard glowing faintly in the dim light. "This beacon," she continued finally, "isn't just a call to the remnants that attacked us. It's a signal, an ancient one, encoded with a message meant for my people, for the Lyrian." Daniel felt a chill run through him. "You think it's trying to contact them? Your people?" Eleanor nodded, her expression unreadable. "Or warn them. But the fact that it's here, on Earth, means something has changed. Either they've been found, or the enemy has uncovered something even worse." Her words settled over him like a storm cloud. That night, Daniel dreamed of stars. He was standing on an endless plain of glass, the heavens above him a riot of light and movement. Vast constellations shifted and twisted, forming patterns that felt achingly familiar, yet impossible to comprehend. In the center of it all stood Eleanor, her form glowing faintly, as if she were made of starlight herself. She reached out to him, her hand trembling, and when he took it, the glass beneath them cracked. He woke with a start, the echo of her voice, soft and desperate, lingering in his ears. "Choose wisely, Daniel." The next morning, Eleanor was waiting for him in her garage. The lithium core pulsed faintly behind her, casting strange shadows on the walls. "I've decoded part of the beacon's message," she said without preamble. Daniel stepped closer, noting the lines of exhaustion etched into her face. "And?" Her gaze met his, steady but heavy with meaning. "It's a warning. It says they're coming, Daniel. The ones who exiled me, the ones who abandoned me here, and they'll stop at nothing to retrieve the core." His stomach tightened. "But why? If they left you behind, why would they care now?" Eleanor hesitated, then turned toward the core. "Because it's not just about me. The core isn't just a power source, it's a key." "A key to what?" "To a weapon," she admitted. "Something my people created long ago, a failsafe against the enemy. But it was deemed too dangerous to use. When the mission failed, They left me with it, hoping it would stay hidden here. But now the enemy knows it's still functional. Daniel stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. So they're coming to destroy it? No, she said softly. They're coming to use it, and if they succeed... She trailed off, her meaning clear. The end of the world wasn't just a metaphor. As the days passed, the quiet suburb seemed to hold its breath. Daniel watched the streets, half expecting to see shadows moving where they shouldn't. The paranoia was a constant thrum in his chest, but Eleanor seemed calm, too calm. One evening, as they sat in her dimly lit living room, he finally confronted her. "You're planning something," he said. She didn't deny it. "You're going to use the core," he continued, his voice tight with realization. "Aren't you?" Eleanor met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "If I don't, they'll take it, and if they take it..." "But you said it's a weapon," he interrupted. "Something your people thought was too dangerous. What happens if you use it?" Her silence was answer enough. "Eleanor," he said, leaning forward, his voice soft but urgent. "There has to be another way." She smiled faintly, the expression tinged with sadness. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. Someone who believed in finding another way no matter the cost." "What happened to them?" "They didn't survive," she said simply. On that night, the choice presented itself. Eleanor woke him with a gentle shake, her expression grim. "They're here," she said. The air outside was thick with tension as they stepped into the yard. The sky was cloudless, the stars cold and distant, but the shadows were alive, moving with purpose. Eleanor held the cylindrical device in one hand, the other resting lightly on the lithium core. "I can activate it," she said, "but once I do, there's no turning back." Daniel looked at her, his heart pounding. "What happens if you don't?" "They'll take it," she said again, "and everything you know will cease to exist." He swallowed hard, his mind racing. "And if you use it?" Her eyes met his, steady but full of unspoken meaning. "I won't survive." The words hit him like a blow. "There has to be another way," he insisted, his voice breaking. "There isn't," she said softly. As the shadows closed in, Daniel made his decision. He stepped forward, placing a hand over hers where it rested on the core. Her eyes widened in surprise, but he shook his head. "If we're doing this," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his chest, "we're doing it together." Eleanor hesitated, her gaze searching his face. Then, with a faint, bittersweet smile, she nodded. The core pulsed beneath their hands, its light growing brighter until it consumed everything. The shadows recoiled, their forms disintegrating in the brilliance, and in that moment, as the world dissolved into light, Daniel felt the weight of Eleanor's choice and his own. Some sacrifices were too great to bear alone. The light of the lithium core faded slowly, its radiance receding like the tide. Daniel stood at the edge of consciousness, his mind adrift in a sea of fractured memories and images that weren't his own. He saw flashes of otherworldly landscapes, entire civilizations rising and falling, and Eleanor, centuries younger, her expression hardened with purpose. When he awoke, the world felt muted, the colors duller, the air heavier. The core sat in the center of Eleanor's garage, dormant now, its once pulsing glow reduced to a faint flicker. The house was eerily silent, save for the sound of his own breathing. "Eleanor?" he called, his voice breaking the stillness. There was no answer. He found her in the backyard, standing beneath the vast expanse of stars. Her silhouette was motionless, her gaze fixed on the sky as if searching for something beyond the visible. "You're still here," he said, relief flooding through him. She turned slowly, and the look in her eyes stopped him cold. There was a distance there, a quiet resignation that chilled him more than any words could. "The core worked," she said softly. "They're gone." Daniel nodded, his chest tight. "But at what cost?" Eleanor smiled faintly, the expression filled with a bittersweet sadness. "The signal the core sent wasn't just a weapon. It was a call to my people, a beacon, but not one of destruction. It was a message of warning, one I hoped would reach them in time." Daniel frowned. "And did it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. But the core is spent now. It's done all it can, and so have I." There was a finality in her tone that made his stomach twist. "What does that mean for you?" Eleanor's gaze softened, and she stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "The core sustained me, Daniel. Without it, I'll fade. Slowly, maybe, but inevitably." His breath caught, the weight of her words sinking in. "There has to be something we can do. Another way." She shook her head, her smile faint but unwavering. "This is my purpose. To protect this world, these people. You. It's enough." The following days passed in a blur of quiet moments and unspoken words. Eleanor continued her routines as though nothing had changed, but Daniel could see the subtle signs, the flicker of exhaustion in her movements, the faint dimming of her vibrant presence. He spent every possible moment with her, trying to preserve each second like a photograph in his mind. They spoke of her homeworld, her mission, and the centuries she had spent observing humanity. "What will you miss the most?" he asked one evening as they sat on her porch, the stars above them cold and indifferent. Eleanor thought for a moment, her expression contemplative. "The little things," she said finally. "The way people laugh even when things are hard, the way you all find beauty in the smallest details. I'll miss you." Daniel's throat tightened. "You don't have to go." Her hand rested lightly on his. "I already am." One morning, Daniel woke to an empty house. Eleanor's belongings remained, but her presence was gone, as though she had been a dream he had only imagined. Panic surged through him as he searched every corner of her home, calling her name, but the silence was his only answer. He found her in the clearing behind her yard, the place where he had first seen her standing alone beneath the stars. She was sitting on the grass, her back to him, her figure illuminated by the pale light of dawn. "Eleanor," he said, his voice breaking. She turned slowly, her smile faint but warm. "I didn't want you to see." "See what?" he asked, his chest tightening. Her form seemed almost translucent, as though the light itself were passing through her. "The core's energy is gone. I can't stay here anymore." Tears blurred his vision as he stepped closer. "There has to be another way. You don't have to go. Not like this." Eleanor reached for his hand, her touch cool but steady. "This was always my path, Daniel. I've lived more lifetimes than I ever imagined, and I chose to spend my last moments here, with you. That's enough for me." He shook his head, his voice trembling. "It's not enough for me." Her gaze held his, steady and unyielding. "It will be, in time." As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Eleanor's form shimmered, the edges of her silhouette dissolving into the light. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "For what?" he asked, his voice breaking. "For reminding me what it means to truly live," she replied. And then she was gone, her form dissipating into the morning light. In the weeks that followed, Daniel found himself returning to her house, unable to let go of the memories they had shared. He kept her journals, the maps of distant worlds, and the fragments of the beacon she had dismantled. But it was the lithium core, now a lifeless relic, that he cherished most. Its once brilliant light had faded, but it remained a symbol of the extraordinary woman who had shared her life, and her secrets, with him. The months later, on a quiet evening, Daniel stood in the clearing where Eleanor had vanished. He gazed up at the stars, his heart heavy but full of a quiet resolve. He didn't know if her message had reached her people or if they even still existed. But he knew one thing for certain. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. As he turned to leave, a faint, familiar light flickered in the sky, brief but unmistakable. Daniel smiled, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "Goodbye, Eleanor," he whispered, and for the first time in months, he felt at peace. Eleanor had gone, but her presence lingered in the stars, in the memories she had left behind, and in the man she had changed forever. The research station Oriel's spire hung in the black, its sleek Althar design gleaming like a shard of frozen light against the velvet abyss of space. On the observation deck, Dr. Leah Shira stared out at the shimmering expanse of the ominous drift, her golden eyes catching faint reflections of distant stars. The drift was a mystery even to the Althar, a swirling sea of subspace anomalies that defied all known laws of physics. It was said to hum when you got close enough, something that always struck Leah as a foolish human romanticism. The station's sensors had been picking up strange fluctuations for weeks now, small tremors in the drift, like ripples from a pebble dropped into a dark pool. These tremors had brought her here, far from the sterile symmetry of her homeworld. Her task, to unravel the origins of the anomalies and their possible connection to the microbial life harvested from the drift. For an Althar xenobiologist like Leah, the assignment should have been routine. Instead, it was turning into something far stranger. Leah's slender fingers hovered over the console, pulling up yet another incomplete set of readings. "Inconclusive," the system chirped with maddening regularity. Her jaw tightened as she reviewed the fragments of data. Energy patterns danced across the screen, forming shapes that seemed on the verge of coherence before dissolving into chaos. She hated chaos. "Dr. Shira," came the clipped voice of her assistant, an Althar named Viren, from the comms channel. "The human shuttle is arriving." "Noted," she replied, her voice precise and flat, betraying no trace of the irritation she felt at the interruption. The human biologist's arrival was an unnecessary complication. Humans were notoriously unpredictable, prone to injecting emotion into situations that demanded pure logic. The hiss of the airlock broke the station's quiet. Leah turned as the door slid open, revealing a man with unruly dark hair and a confident, easy gait. Dr. Elias Voss stepped into the pristine Althar corridors like a mismatched puzzle piece, a faint smile tugging at his lips as his eyes roamed the sterile surroundings. "You must be Dr. Shira," he said, extending a hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Leah studied the hand for a fraction too long before offering a formal nod instead. "Dr. Voss, welcome to Oriel's Spire. Your quarters have been prepared. We'll begin work tomorrow at 0700. Elias chuckled softly, withdrawing his hand. "Straight to business. I like it. Though, if you don't mind me saying, I'm surprised. I expected more people." Leah stiffened. "The Spire requires no more than a minimal crew. Efficiency is paramount." "Efficient, sure," he said, letting his gaze linger on the quiet, gleaming corridors. "But efficient doesn't always mean effective." His tone was light, almost teasing, but Leah felt an odd prickle of irritation. "The Althar do not waste resources. You will find that our methods yield results." Elias's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened slightly, as if filing away her words for later examination. He changed the subject smoothly. "And the drift? Any luck figuring out what's causing those anomalies?" For the first time, Leah hesitated. She considered giving a sanitized answer, one that omitted the more baffling aspects of the readings. But something in Elias's gaze, curious, unguarded, made her choose otherwise. "The anomalies are inconsistent," she admitted. "They defy established patterns. We've detected energy signatures that resemble biological processes, but their origins are unclear. Further analysis is required." "Biological energy patterns?" Elias frowned, his brow furrowing. "That's not what I expected. How do you even measure something like that?" It is not measured, Leah replied sharply. It is inferred through... She stopped herself. His question was not uninformed but exploratory, a human tendency she found both irritating and oddly refreshing. We use a layered analysis of quantum flux and subspace harmonics, she said, softening her tone. Sounds fascinating, he said, though his expression suggested he was already formulating a dozen new questions. Before Leah could respond, the station shuddered, a faint but unmistakable tremor that seemed to ripple through the deck beneath their feet. What was that? Elias asked, his voice suddenly taut. Leah was already moving toward the console, her fingers flying over the controls. An anomaly, she said, her voice clipped. The drift's fluctuations are intensifying. The station's lights dimmed for a moment, then stabilized. On the monitor, the energy patterns she had been studying earlier were now surging wildly, their chaotic shapes coalescing into something disturbingly regular. A spiral. Elias stepped closer, his brow furrowed as he studied the display. That looks deliberate, he murmured. Leah stiffened. The idea was absurd. Patterns in nature were not deliberate. Yet as she watched the spiral pulse and shift, she felt an uncharacteristic chill run down her spine. It is a natural phenomenon, she said, more to herself than to him. Is it? Elias asked, his voice quiet. There was no mockery in his tone, only a deep, unsettling curiosity. The console chimed, interrupting them. A new signal had appeared on the sensors, something moving within the drift. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but its trajectory was unmistakable. It was heading directly for the station. Leah stared at the readings, her usually calm mind racing. Objects didn't move through the drift. The anomalies were static, chaotic pockets of energy that defied navigation. Is this normal? Elias asked, though the answer was clear in his voice. No, Leah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For the first time in her career, she felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of doubt, and as the station's alarms began to sound, she realized that the drift, once a mere curiosity, had become something far more dangerous. The alarms reverberated through Oriel's spire like the cry of a living being, shrill and relentless. Leah's precise fingers danced over the console as she fought to stabilize the station's sensors, her breath measured but taut with suppressed tension. The drift was stirring, its previously sporadic ripples now gathering momentum into something deliberate. But what? Behind her, Elias stood with his arms crossed, studying the screen with an expression that was far too calm for Leah's liking. His gaze lingered on the faint signal moving toward them, an object that defied explanation. This thing, Elias began, his voice low but steady. It's not just drifting, is it? It's navigating. Leah stiffened, her eyes narrowing at his choice of words. The drift does not permit navigation, she replied tersely. Its subspace anomalies make directed movement impossible. Whatever this is, it's following some anomalous force. A force we don't understand, Elias pointed out, stepping closer to her workstation. She ignored the challenge in his tone and focused on the readouts. The object's trajectory was unwavering, its approach marked by pulses of energy that echoed the spiraling patterns from before. Leah felt a strange unease settle in her chest, a sensation she had no name for, but knew instinctively to distrust. This could be a natural phenomenon, she said, her voice firmer now, as though saying it aloud could make it true. A fragment of subspace debris caught in the drift's currents. Elias raised an eyebrow. And the biological energy signatures? Leah's jaw tightened. Coincidence. For a moment they stood in silence, the hum of the station filling the air between them. Then the tremor came, a deep, bone-rattling vibration that made the very walls seem to groan. Leah stumbled but caught herself on the edge of the console. Elias steadied himself against a bulkhead, his expression sharpening. That didn't feel like debris, he said. Leah ignored him, her fingers flying over the console again. The object had drawn closer, now less than 2 kilometers from the station. Its readings were still maddeningly incomplete, but one detail stood out. The energy signature was increasing in complexity, shifting from chaotic bursts to something more rhythmic. A pattern. "Is it signaling?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with wonder. Leah turned to glare at him. "You're extrapolating. There's no evidence." The lights dimmed again, plunging the room into a fleeting but profound darkness before the emergency systems kicked in. This time, the console's display flickered and changed, lines of alien code spiraling across the screen. Leah froze, her mind racing. The symbols were unfamiliar, yet they carried an unsettling sense of intent. "Dr. Shira," came Viren's voice through the comms. His usual clinical tone was edged with something Leah had never heard from him before. Apprehension. "The anomaly's energy field is interacting with the station's systems. It is bypassing standard firewalls." Leah's chest tightened. The Althar prided themselves on their technological superiority. Their systems were impenetrable, or so she had believed. Elias leaned closer to the console, his curiosity undeterred by the rising tension. "Can you isolate the intrusion?" "I'm trying," Leah snapped, her hands moving with controlled urgency. "The protocols are holding, but—" Another tremor interrupted her, this one accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't mechanical, nor did it seem to come from the station itself. It was external, resonating through the structure like a whisper carried on a vast, invisible tide. Elias tilted his head, his expression shifting. "Do you hear that?" Leah didn't answer. She was too focused on the console, her frustration mounting as the alien code continued to proliferate. The patterns were growing more intricate, almost as if the anomaly were learning. Then, without warning, the hum resolved into something unmistakable. A voice. It wasn't a voice in the conventional sense. There were no words, no language. Yet its presence was undeniable, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to bypass the ears entirely, settling instead in the bones and the mind. Elias straightened, his eyes wide. "That's not interference. That's—" Leah cut him off. "It's an artifact of the energy field," she said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. Before Elias could respond, the station's main display activated, filling the room with a pulsating light. The alien symbols coalesced into a singular shape, a spiral, its edges flickering with unstable energy. Leah stared at it, her logical mind struggling to reconcile the impossibility before her. The comms crackled again, and Viren's voice returned. "Dr. Shira, the object is now within 1 kilometer. Its energy field is destabilizing the station's outer hull." Leah felt a cold dread settle over her. The drift's anomalies had always been theoretical, distant. Now, one was knocking at her door, and she had no answers. "We need to evacuate," Elias said, his tone suddenly serious. "Whatever this thing is, it's affecting the station in ways we don't understand. If the hull breaches—" "No," Leah interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "We do not abandon our post. The Althar do not retreat from the unknown." Elias studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fine. But we need a plan." Leah's mind raced. The object's energy signature was growing more complex by the second, its influence spreading through the station's systems. Containment was no longer an option. "We isolate the anomaly," she said finally. "Reroute all non-essential systems to a secondary network. If we can disrupt its connection to the station, we may be able to neutralize it." "And if that doesn't work?" Elias asked. Leah hesitated, her gaze flickering to the pulsating spiral on the screen. "Then we will adapt." It was an Althar mantra, but as the words left her lips, she couldn't help but feel the irony. Adaptation was a human strength, not hers, and for the first time, she wondered if her detachment would be enough to face what was coming. As the station trembled again, the alien hum growing louder, Leah knew one thing with unsettling clarity. The mystery of the drift was no longer a distant puzzle to be solved. It had become a living force, and it was reaching for them. The alien spiral on the screen pulsed like a living heartbeat, casting shifting shadows that danced along the pristine walls of the command center. Leah stood motionless, her golden Althar eyes locked onto the image, as if trying to will it into submission. The hum, low and resonant, filled the room, a sound that felt like it bypassed the ears and settled directly into the bones. It was no longer subtle. It was insistent, as though demanding attention. Elias broke the silence, his voice quiet but sharp. "That's not just interference, it's trying to communicate." "Communicate?" Leah's voice held an edge of disbelief. Her logical mind rebelled against the idea. "You're anthropomorphizing an anomaly. It's a pattern of energy interacting with the station's systems, nothing more." "And yet," Elias countered, gesturing to the screen, "it's creating symbols we can recognize. That's not random. That's intent." Before Leah could respond, the station trembled again, a deeper, more violent shudder than before. Panels along the walls flickered, and a sharp hiss escaped from one of the vents. Leah's hands moved instinctively to the console, stabilizing power to the critical systems. "Outer hull integrity is compromised," Viren's voice reported through the comms, his usual detached tone now strained. "The anomaly's energy field is causing molecular destabilization in the structure. I recommend immediate evacuation." "We're not leaving," Leah snapped, her fingers flying over the controls. "Reroute power to the external dampeners. Contain the destabilization." "The external dampeners are offline," Viren replied. "The energy signatures are resisting the reroute protocols." Leah froze for a fraction of a second. "Resisting?" "It's like it knows what we're doing," Elias said, his voice hushed but steady. Leah turned to him, frustration flickering across her usually controlled features. "You are jumping to conclusions based on incomplete data. There is no evidence that this anomaly is sentient." Elias met her gaze with a calm intensity that disarmed her. "Then why does it feel like it's watching us?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Leah turned back to the console, burying herself in the task of stabilizing the station. Yet her hands trembled slightly as they moved across the controls. She couldn't shake the feeling that Elias might be right. The object's signal grew stronger, its proximity triggering a cascade of system malfunctions. Lights flickered, the hum deepened, and the spiral on the screen began to shift. The smooth curves fractured and reformed, rearranging themselves into a series of jagged, angular shapes. Leah frowned, her analytical mind racing to interpret the new configuration. "It's changing," Elias said, leaning closer to the screen. "What do those shapes mean?" "They're geometric," Leah said slowly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But they don't match any known mathematical systems. They're—" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "What?" Elias pressed. "They're three-dimensional projections," she said, her voice sharpening with realization. "Look at the intersections. They suggest depth and movement. It's not just a symbol, it's a structure." As if responding to her words, the station trembled again. This time, the vibrations were accompanied by a low-frequency tone that resonated throughout the spire. The console screen flickered, and the shapes began to spin, their angular edges blurring into a vortex of light and shadow. And then the tone stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the station's life support systems. Leah's breath caught as the console screen went dark, the symbols disappearing. "What just happened?" Elias asked, his voice hushed. Before Leah could respond, a soft, golden glow filled the room. It emanated from the observation window, casting an ethereal light across their faces. Both scientists turned slowly, their gazes drawn to the source. The object had arrived. Leah's breath caught as she stared at the anomaly outside the window. It wasn't a simple fragment of debris, as she had hoped, nor was it a mere sphere of energy as the readings had suggested. It was something far stranger. a shifting, amorphous mass of light and shadow, its edges blurring and reforming as it pulsed in perfect harmony with the hum. "It's beautiful," Elias murmured, his voice filled with awe. Leah said nothing. Her analytical mind was overwhelmed by the sheer alienness of what she was seeing. The object defied classification, existing on the cusp of form and formlessness. As she watched, it moved closer, its glow intensifying until the room was bathed in golden light. "It's not just moving," Elias said, his voice tinged with wonder. "It's reacting to us." Leah turned to him sharply. "You don't know that." "Don't I?" Elias gestured to the anomaly. "Look at it. It's changing in response to our presence. You can't deny that." Before Leah could respond, the comms crackled again. Viren's voice was urgent now. "Dr. Shira, the anomaly's energy field is penetrating the station's shields. It's—" His words were cut off as the room was suddenly filled with a sharp, piercing tone. Leah clutched her head, the sound drilling into her mind like a physical force. She staggered, her vision blurring as the golden light seemed to pulse in time with the tone. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the sound stopped. Leah opened her eyes, blinking against the afterimage of the light. Elias was already at her side, his hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was unsteady. She straightened, her gaze returning to the window. The anomaly had changed again. Its form was no longer amorphous. It had become structured. A spiral of light, its edges sharp and defined, hovered just beyond the station. And then, for the first time, Leah felt it. A presence. It wasn't a voice, not in the traditional sense. It was a sensation, a deep, resonant awareness that seemed to touch her very core. "Do you feel that?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah nodded slowly, her analytical mind struggling to process what her instincts already knew. The anomaly wasn't just an object, it was alive. The golden spiral hung outside the station like an eternal question mark, its sharp-edged curves flickering with unsettling precision. Leah stood in the observation deck, her arms crossed tightly, as though the pressure of her embrace could contain the storm of thoughts within her. Despite the anomaly's proximity, the station had stabilized. The hum, once an insistent vibration in the walls, now hummed softly, like the breath of a vast and unknowable being. Elias sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, his tablet balanced on his knees. His attention, however, wasn't on the device but on the spiral itself. His dark eyes flickered with unrestrained curiosity, a stark contrast to Leah's wariness. "It's waiting," Elias said, after a long silence. "For what?" Leah's voice was sharper than she intended, but she didn't soften it. She didn't want to. "For us," he replied simply. Leah bristled. "You speak as though it has intent, like it's some sentient force. It's a phenomenon, Elias, an anomaly." She gestured to the spiral with an almost accusatory motion. "It does not wait. It does not think. It simply is." Elias tilted his head, considering her words. Then, with maddening calm, he asked, "If it doesn't think, Leah, why does it change every time we interact with it? Why does it feel alive?" Her silence betrayed her uncertainty. The spiral's presence had drawn the station's small crew to the observation deck, their postures a mix of awe and apprehension. Viren, the synthetic intelligence who had been Leah's companion through countless missions, stood apart, his sleek frame lit faintly by the spiral's glow. "It has begun interfacing with the station again," Viren said, his voice even but heavy with implications. "The energy patterns are non-invasive, but they are attempting to access deeper systems. It is polite." Leah turned to him sharply. "Polite?" "It could force its way in," Viren replied, his golden photoreceptors focusing on her. "But it does not. It requests." This revelation sent a ripple of unease through the room. Leah's eyes darted to Elias, who was already looking at her with the expression of a man whose theory had just gained unsettling traction. "What does it want?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "I cannot determine intent," Viren said, "but its energy signatures suggest a singular purpose: connection." The word lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. The choice came to Leah in a quiet, unguarded moment, like a shadow slipping through the cracks of her resolve. The spiral's intent, if that was even the right word, was clear. It wanted to interface directly, not with the station, but with her. Viren had confirmed as much. The spiral's energy patterns had begun to mirror the unique electromagnetic signals of her neural pathways, adapting to her thought rhythms in ways that were both fascinating and terrifying. Elias had argued passionately for the connection. "It's reaching out to us, Leah. To you. If you let it in, we might finally understand what it is, why it's here." "And if I don't survive?" she'd countered. He'd faltered at that, but hadn't relented. "You're Althar. Your neural network is resilient, adaptable. If anyone can handle this, it's you." But even as he spoke, Leah had felt the weight of the decision settling on her. This wasn't about resilience or adaptability. This was about trust, trusting an entity they didn't understand, trusting her ability to remain herself in the face of the unknown. Now, as she stood alone in the dimly lit interface chamber, Leah felt the weight of her choice pressing down on her. The chamber had been modified hastily, the usual sterile walls now pulsating faintly with the golden glow of the spiral's energy field. Viren stood at the controls, his expression unreadable. "Are you certain?" he asked, his tone more measured than usual. "No," Leah admitted, "but certainty isn't a luxury we have right now." Elias's voice crackled over the comms. "We're ready on our end, Leah. The neural buffers are in place. If anything goes wrong, we can sever the connection immediately." She nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed him. Taking a deep breath, she lowered herself into the interface chair. The metal was cold against her back, grounding her in the present moment. She closed her eyes as the neural uplink activated, the faint hum of the system blending seamlessly with the spiral's own resonance. And then it began. At first, there was nothing. A void. Then, light. Golden tendrils unfurled in her mind, delicate yet impossibly vast. They wove through her thoughts, not intruding but observing, their touch as light as a whisper. Leah braced herself, expecting pain, but there was none. Instead, there was curiosity. Images flooded her consciousness, spirals within spirals, fractals unfolding into infinity. She saw the drift as she had never seen it before, its chaotic currents revealed as intricate patterns, each ripple a note in an endless symphony. And then came the voices. They weren't voices in the traditional sense, but impressions, emotions distilled into pure thought. The spiral wasn't one being, it was many, a collective consciousness woven together by the currents of the drift. They had been watching, waiting, seeking something they lacked: understanding. Leah felt their yearning, their struggle to bridge the gap between their world and hers. She saw flashes of their existence, an existence without individuality, without boundaries. To them, humanity's chaotic, fragmented nature was both incomprehensible and beautiful. When the connection broke, Leah gasped, her body trembling as though she had just surfaced from the depths of an ocean. Viren was at her side immediately, his metallic hands steadying her. "Doctor? Shira?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was hoarse. Elias's face appeared on the comm screen, his expression a mix of relief and anticipation. "What did you see?" Leah took a deep breath, steadying herself. "They're not hostile," she said finally. "They're curious. About us. About what makes us different." "Why now?" Elias asked. Leah hesitated. Because we're imperfect, she said slowly, the weight of the realization settling over her. They see our flaws, our conflicts, and they want to understand, to learn. The room fell silent as her words sank in, and for the first time since the anomaly had arrived, Leah felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. The golden spiral lingered outside the station, its brilliance softer now, almost subdued, as though it had exhaled after holding its breath for eons. Leah stood at the observation deck, her reflection superimposed on the glowing anomaly. For the first time since its arrival, she felt its presence without fear or unease. They understand now, Leah said aloud, her voice a quiet murmur. Behind her, Elias leaned against the console, arms crossed as he studied her. Understand what? Leah turned to face him, her gaze steady. Us, our imperfection, our chaos. She gestured vaguely, struggling to find words for something that transcended language. To them, existence is a singular thread, no deviation, no division. But we're fragments, messy, incomplete pieces trying to fit together. And they see value in that? Elias asked, skepticism tinged with wonder. They see potential, Leah corrected. A possibility they lack. For them, every action, every thought is part of a preordained harmony. But our ability to err, to change, to choose, that's what they want to understand. Elias was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he asked, "What happens now?" And the decision hadn't been Leah's alone to make. The station's crew, the Althar Council, even the Human Interstellar Alliance, all had weighed in, their voices a cacophony of caution and curiosity. But ultimately, it was Leah and Elias who stood in the interface chamber, ready to act as ambassadors to something far beyond their understanding. The spiral's presence within her mind had left a mark, not physical, but undeniable. Leah could feel its awareness even now, a faint hum at the edge of her consciousness. It was waiting, patient, yet eager, for their answer. "We connect," Leah said finally, her voice resolute. Elias nodded, his faith in her decision unshaken. Together then. The interface process was different this time, more deliberate. The station's systems had been calibrated to facilitate the connection, with Viren overseeing every detail. Leah and Elias sat side by side in the modified chairs, their neural interfaces humming softly as they activated. As the golden light enveloped them, Leah felt the now familiar tendrils of the spiral's consciousness brushing against hers. But this time it wasn't just observation, it was invitation. She reached out, not with her hands but with her mind, letting her thoughts merge with the anomaly's collective awareness. Beside her, Elias did the same, his presence a steady anchor in the vast ocean of the spiral's being. And then, they were no longer individuals. The connection was overwhelming, yet harmonious, a flood of sensations and memories that defied comprehension. Leah saw glimpses of the spiral's world, a place of endless unity, where thought and action were indistinguishable, where individuality had never existed. But she also felt its longing. The spiral's collective mind ached with a yearning it couldn't fully articulate. It sought what it had never known, the beauty of divergence, the strength born of struggle, the power of choice. Through the connection, Leah and Elias shared their own truths, memories of triumph and failure, of love and loss, of moments that defined them as individuals. They offered the spiral a window into the fragmented, chaotic existence it had observed from afar, and slowly the spiral began to change. Its consciousness, once rigid and unified, started to ripple with new patterns. Fractals of thought emerged, distinct yet interconnected, each one a tiny ember of individuality. The collective mind shifted, its harmony giving way to a new kind of beauty, one that embraced imperfection. When the connection severed, Leah gasped, her chest heaving as though she had just surfaced from the depths of an endless sea. Beside her, Elias blinked rapidly, his expression a mix of exhaustion and awe. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the station's systems, but outside the observation window, the spiral had transformed. Its sharp-edged curves had softened, its golden light now tinged with hues of blue and violet. It pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of a newborn star. "They've changed," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah nodded, her gaze fixed on the anomaly. "And so have we." The spiral began its departure a few hours later, its energy field retracting as it prepared to return to the drift. Leah and Elias stood side by side on the observation deck, watching as the anomaly slowly faded from view. "What happens now?" Elias asked, echoing his earlier question. Leah smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. "We document, we study, and we wait." "For what?" "For them to come back," she said simply. As the station returned to its usual hum of activity, Leah found herself alone in the interface chamber, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. She placed a hand on the console, its surface cool beneath her fingers. The spiral's presence lingered in her mind, not as an intrusion, but as a quiet echo. It had left something behind, a fragment of itself, a seed of understanding that would grow in time. And as she stood there, Leah realized something profound. The spiral hadn't just been studying humanity. It had been teaching them as well, about connection, about choice, about the infinite possibilities born from imperfection. And as Leah walked away from the chamber, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The story wasn't over, but for now, it was enough.